You are listening to the Concierge Minister Podcast, a place to grow, learn, and be inspired as you discover God's purpose for your life. Here's your host, the pastor you've always wanted without the church, Dr. Kumar Dixit.
Well, welcome back to another episode of Concierge Minister Podcast. I'm your host, Kumar Dixit. Happy New Year. Hope you survived the holidays with your family. I have a question to ask you. When was the last time you had like a graphic or vivid dream? Do you dream often? Do you remember the details of your dreams in the morning? Do you dream in color? Do you have regular nightmares? We just went through the Christmas holidays, and I find it actually very interesting that the Christmas story includes a lot of stuff that Christians today probably don't support openly. For example, there's this important dream that's pivotal to the Christmas narrative. You know what I'm talking about, right? From Luke. There's magi from the east. We like to call them wise men, but keep digging deeper and take a look at the fact that they were studying a star that today we would call either astronomy or maybe some hints of astrology. And just as the angel came to Mary in the Lucan account, the question that I want to pose is, does God still speak to us today through dreams? My guest today is someone I've known for a very, very long time. In fact, almost, I think, for 48 years. I can't remember how old I am, if I'm 47 or 48, but whatever I am, that's how long I've known this person. And over the years, Dr. Cynthia Cavali and I have had conversations that have gravitated towards the spiritual, the mystical, and recently, in the last 5 or so years, a lot about dream analysis. Cynthia Cavali is a executive leadership coach and consultant with several corporations where she works with all levels, from the C-suite to VPs and directors to even new managers, helping them develop their leadership, communication skills, and emotional intelligence. In her private practice, she coaches individual clients through major life challenges, death of a loved one's, loss in career, and to help them reconnect with their true identity and purpose. She employs the framework of Jungian psychology, complexity science, and mythology to help her clients understand the way that their inner life informs and supports their outer life. And she loves working with dreams. And that's why she's here today and helping others understand their dreaming selves. Cynthia, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Kumar. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, because I know what you do for work. I know how busy you are. And just as I'm reading about how you coach C-suite and VPs, I'm like, concierge minister is neither. So thank you for giving me your time. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
And if I remember right, one of the things that I was thinking about today is it's such an interesting thing how, you are working with clients, you're doing a lot of psychology, sociology, spiritual work with people, you're doing Jungian work. But I know you as from your first career, and that was like a scientist who, if I remember right, built bombs. Is that right? Weren't you a actual scientist that, tell me.
I was a rocket scientist.
Yes.
Yeah, you could say that. I was an aerospace engineer.
Okay.
And I worked in missile defense. So I worked on defense. Well, my first job was on offensive weapons systems, which I didn't really understand what I was doing at the time.
Okay.
And then the whole industry shifted from offensive to defensive weapon systems.
Okay.
And so I had left for a little while, and when I came back, I was working on defensive weapon systems. And then from there, I moved into systems thinking, systems engineering, and thinking in organizational systems. And then that's what I got my doctorate in, was human systems.
Okay.
And along the way, I became interested in and I had always been interested in Jungian psychology, and the framework of Jung really resonated for me and aligned with my personal experiences of the world and reality. And so when I was going for my doctorate, I did my research on Jung's theory of synchronicity, his concept of synchronicity.
And so I find that so interesting because you don't find rocket scientists and people with an engineering mind and background to necessarily kind of be somebody who's a coach and more on the psychological side. So are you using like both sides of your brain to make this work?
Well, I find that a lot of the clients I get from the corporations are technical types of people, people in technical fields who have moved into management. A lot of times corporations will find somebody who's technically astute, excellent as a technical person, and then they almost ruin them by deciding they should become managers and leaders.
Yeah.
And they don't necessarily have the skill set that translates from a technical knowledge and know-how or expertise to the more emotional side of working with people and drawing out their best behaviors. So
interesting.
That's
interesting. So let's talk about what we're here for, and that's dreaming and dreams. I know you very well, as I said, for a long time, and I know you grew up being raised as a Christian. You were raised in the same kind of denomination and kind of subculture as I did. So you understand my intro when I was talking about how dreams are used a lot in Scripture. Where are you now? I know you grew up as a Christian. I'm not necessarily. I don't think you are any longer. Or where do you? I should have put words in your mouth. So where do you kind of see yourself today?
Well, I certainly identify as a Christian. I am still a believer in Christ and all of the things that we were taught, but I also believe in other things. So things became more, we could say.
Okay.
And so I would say that it was my experience of God, which moved beyond the bounds of what I had been taught about God and what the beliefs of our church, our denomination were, into now, how do I reconcile this personal experience I'm having of God with what I've been taught? And experience has to come to the forefront. It has to take priority. For me, it did, because that was my truth. That was what I knew for sure. I couldn't claim for sure any of the things in the Bible that I had not experienced. I could just say, I believe these things. But the things that I'd experienced, I didn't have to believe. I knew them.
Yeah.
They were things that I knew firsthand. So I had always been a little uncomfortable with the whole proselytizing aspect of our denomination. And this alleviated that pressure, because it was all about now it wasn't about convincing someone to believe something. It was all about, what have you experienced and how does that align with what you were taught? And is it time to redefine your own story about what's true for you? And how do you make that happen? So that's what happened to me. So along the way, I studied, I was very interested in what other religions taught about God. And it wasn't that they were right and my upbringing was wrong, not at all. It was, these are the other experiences that other people in other cultures have had with the divine. And what does that say? And have I experienced that? Yes, sometimes. I remember in 5th grade, I think it was, taking world literature and reading excerpts from the Upanishads. And I was stunned because they knew what I had experienced about in my prayers and with my relationship with God or Jesus. And I had not found that actually in the Bible, stated in quite that way. And I just tucked that away in the back of my head. And when I found that to be the case later on with more and more holy writings from other traditions, I began to realize, well, they know what I've experienced. They have experienced what I've experienced, and I could never deny their experience of it. So I had to accept there was more. And
It's really, that's really amazing. I, as you're talking, I'm thinking about like, calling you like, I asked if you're a Christian in the beginning, and the way to describe you is like, you're Christian plus, like you have the basic, development as a Christian, but you have had so much more experiences, because you've opened yourself up to much more of the deity and the divine. So yeah, I think that, your background and your experience, within what we call, conservative or traditional Christianity, to exploring kind of to a wider worldview allows you to be more open to the idea that the divine comes to us in many different facets. And one of them is through dreams.
Absolutely.
My mom, and you knew my mom. My mom was kind of sort of like a witch doctor. She would kill me for saying that, but she had dreams and they came true. And throughout her whole life, as a little child, she dreamt dreams. Throughout her, grown life. In fact, there's one time we were in Tennessee together. We were walking into a hospital, and she stopped me, and she said, "Hold on, real quick." And she went to, this is a true story. She went over to a payphone. She dialed a number, and like all these quarters came out of the payphone. And she like took it out, and she had like the smile on her face, and she like, it was probably like $3 worth of coins, but that was a lot of money coming out of a payphone. She put it in her pocket. I said, "Mom, what did you do?" And she started laughing. She said, "I dreamt that if I put this number at this payphone, that money would come out." And sure enough, like I saw it with my own eyes, like stuff like that happened our whole life,
That's
and
fantastic.
so there's no part of me denying that there are they're divine, but also supernatural parts of our being that oftentimes we're not really connected to.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's a great story. I
Yeah.
could see her doing it.
So tell me, where did you start kind of getting interested in this idea of dream and dream analysis?
Well, I'd always had very vivid dreams. And we also, in my family, had dreams that came true. And my mom put a lot of stock in dreams. And, according to her, they all came from God, and God was speaking to us.
Mm-hmm.
But that didn't explain the whole variety of dreams we had. That explained some of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then I went through a phase when I was a young engineer where I didn't know how to reconcile my dream life with the science that I was being taught, that things are random, that there isn't such a thing as meaning in the universe, that life is more random than that. And I did move away from my dream life for a while. I stopped writing them down. I stopped paying attention to them. And honestly, it makes me sad even to remember that time. I just stopped believing that they had anything meaningful to say to me. And then my life moved along, bumpy as normal.
As life goes. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I began reading more about mythology, and I found Jung, and something drew me to him. And I appreciated the deeper way that he thought about the world. But I had trouble navigating his writing. He can be difficult.
Yeah,
and,
dense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't familiar with the language that
Mm-hmm.
he used. And then I read Joseph Campbell and mythology, and he blew my mind. It was like having been thirsty my whole life. And then this was just, he helped me make sense of the narratives, the biblical narratives that I had been taught from childhood.
Mm-hmm.
He helped me make sense of the other Abrahamic religions and their narratives, and how to reconcile those with each other. He helped me understand what the symbolism in Hinduism was referring to, much further than what I had understood, and in Buddhism and many of the other world religions. And also his specialty was the American Indians. and their mythologies. So a lot of indigenous peoples and their relationship to the earth and the world and the, the environment around them, it was just so mind-blowing and healing. And so my leaving our church was never angry. It was never about, oh, you let me down, you disappointed me. It was never any of those things. I'm so filled with gratitude for the upbringing that I received and the biblical knowledge that I was given. When in talking to anybody, we that we know the Bible pretty well, and it's never a problem to talk. People think there are things in the Bible. It's like, that's not in the Bible, actually. That's just a wise saying somebody said. That's not biblical.
Right. We are definitely Bible. We have PhDs in Bible knowledge, maybe not necessarily, in Bible heart, right? Is kind of the challenge. I'm thinking about the story of Joseph in Genesis, where, he has this dream and he's kind of just this young teenager and kind of I think of Joseph, to be honest with you, as kind of a brat, because he has these dreams and he's like just telling his brothers like, hey, look at you all gonna bow down before me, but throughout the Bible, people don't have dreams and then it's over. They have dreams and then it needs to be interpreted, right? So I'm thinking about Nebuchadnezzar. He's going crazy because he had all these dreams and no one can figure out, who's going to be able to interpret the dreams. And so it's not that we just have dreams given to us, it's that also the dreams must be explained to us. And in many cases, it's being explained to us to prepare us for something that's ahead of us. What are your thoughts about that?
Right. So the older cultures in humanity had ways of thinking about dreams. They had a culture that included dreaming and the dream life. It's only later on, when you had rational thought come into the picture, that people began to think of the inner life as something different and began focusing outwardly. That was a departure. And maybe it was a necessary departure because it forced people to think more logically about things and not so, there was a lot of superstition that happened. And the rational movement helped to tighten people's thinking up more. But we're at our, fundamentally, we are non-rational beings. And so, these older traditions had a way of understanding dreams. There was a context for dreams. There was a whole culture around it. They had wise men, they had soothsayers, they had advisors to the king who would help interpret dreams. And it wasn't a logical, rational thing. I think that their wisdom and their logic and their rational thinking included dreams. It wasn't what we would consider rational thinking, right?
So say a little bit more about that we are not rational beings.
Well, I would say that the world fundamentally is non-rational. At the heart of number systems, they are inherently non-rational. You can come to a rational place. You can put a rational lens on things. You can, if you're trying to understand the world, it's vast, it's so huge. So you pick a piece of it and you try to develop a simple model that will help you narrow down the options so that you can understand that little bit of it. And that's an extremely effective approach to understanding the world. What happens is, if it's super successful, which it has been, we tend to think that that's actually the real reality, and we neglect everything else. So, there are scientists who recognize that the world has an inherently non-rational underpinning to it. But there are a lot of scientists who've forgotten that and who eschew the non-rational, and they don't know how to, it's tricky. You don't know how to handle it. How do you get your arms around it? What is it about? That's what actually drew me to physics. I was really interested in how physics explained the world and reality. And then when I after I worked in that area for a while, it didn't explain everything. It didn't explain
Mm.
human beings, and it didn't explain consciousness. And
Mhm.
so I began looking further, and I feel that Jung actually at least acknowledged that problem and got closer to including that in his framework. And then I began to study complexity science, and then that gets closer to the mystery. So it's been a fascinating journey,
Mm.
starting with the question of what is consciousness, what is the nature of consciousness, and how does it evolve through us and through human systems.
Mhm.
So that's kind of where I've been.
So
And
why?
dreams play a part. I'm sorry. Dreams
Yeah,
play a part in that.
yeah. So
Yes.
why are we so? Let me think of the word and I'll start over again. So why are we so suspicious of dreams and what they mean in people's lives? Like imagine today, like a 14 or 16-year-old girl came and said, I had a dream and an angel told me that I'm pregnant and I'm gonna have I'm actually going to give birth to the savior of the world. Like that would be a problem, and I probably think it would have been even a problem back then. But why is it that we are so? And I know what you were saying, especially in particular because of where we are today in a modern age compared to, 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. But why are we so suspicious of God speaking to us in biblical format, but we are unwilling to accept it today?
Well, I actually think it's good to be skeptical, because anybody can say anything and people are crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
people say all kinds of things. It's not like they have a good handle of not on their self-knowledge. They don't
Mhm.
know themselves a lot of times. Many people that I encounter every day, the percentage of people who really pay attention to themselves and their reactions and who strive to know themselves and their not so great qualities and their great qualities
Mhm.
is very small.
Yeah.
So I don't know, when somebody comes to me and says, God told me this, especially when somebody says, God told me to shoot all these people.
Yeah.
Really? I mean, I
Mhm.
find that hard to believe.
Mhm.
So I think it's right to be skeptical when people say things like that. I think that there are several layers to the answer to the question that you're asking. One is that the stories that we get, and this is a perspective that I've come to embrace and that not everybody does. I don't necessarily believe in the literal interpretation of the stories that are in the Bible.
Mhm.
There's a process that happens over time where you can have a good man or a good woman, but typically in our culture, it's a good man who does and says wise things and helps people and is venerated by the people who are his followers. And after, I don't know, I don't remember the time span, but 200-300 years, that person is seen as a divinity.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
there is that process that we know happens in human culture. So, the story that we have now is not a word for word historical factual document. It is
Mhm.
a story that speaks at a mythological level. And the mythological level is not, as some people say, a lie. It's not the same as a myth. A myth is something that's not true. A
Mhm.
mythology, and the myth in the mythological sense, is true. It's just not true in the literal, concrete way. It's true in a deeper, more inward knowing way. And so to say that you're 16 and you're pregnant, or 14 and pregnant, and it was God did it, that's crazy talk in a literal sense. But in a
Mhm.
mythological sense, it has huge layers of meaning that
I'm
are
so
at,
glad.
go
No, I'm
ahead.
sorry. I'm so glad you're explaining the difference between myth and mythology, because I only have two listeners, and I think that probably like one of them's already left now. Like the fundamental one, fundamentalist has left already. They're like, "What? She says the Bible is myth," and so I just want to welcome my one listener who's left now, so who was willing to listen through what Cynthia said. But yeah, you're right. I mean, what you're saying is that it wasn't it's not an autobiography. It's definitely, there's portions of it that are mythological. They're stories to tell us stories, to explain. I mean, Jonah is a good example of that, right? So I think that you raise a good point. And so then we have to ask ourselves, what is this saying to us, right?
Yeah. And, even if you want to see it as a literal story, if you only stay at the literal interpretation, you're missing the point. The reason that it lasted, the reason it made it into the Bible was because of a lot of other levels of meaning that it possesses, not because it was literally true, but because it spoke at the level of a heart. The whole idea of the virgin birth has mythological meanings that are significant to us. And if we only focus on the fact that she was this young and she was a virgin and it was this miraculous thing, we miss the whole point of the virgin birth, which is that you're talking about something that is occurring, a birth that is occurring at the level of the heart, rather than, through the mundane human physical ways of giving birth. Not to say that is inferior, but it is a different kind of an event. You're talking about a heart level event, not a concrete thing. So you miss the meaning if you stay only with the concrete interpretation.
Do you think there's certain people on this earth that are, who are spiritual seers? We all have spirituality, we all are spiritual beings, but then there's other people, because one of the things that you mentioned earlier about when I was mentioning Nebuchadnezzar, is that there were people employed in the king's palace who were looked upon as dream interpreters, who were wise counsel, people who had higher levels of spirituality. So do you think that we have spiritual people that are around us that have a greater understanding and access to the universe than the rest of us do? Hey guys, it's Kumar Dixit, your concierge minister. I just wanted to interrupt for a moment and just invite you to pray with me or have me pray for you. Sometimes people just don't have the right words. Sometimes you're just so overwhelmed. You haven't prayed in a long time and you're like, man, I really need someone to pray for me. Do not hesitate to contact me at conciergeminister.com. You'll see on the front page a tab for prayer. Click on it, send your prayer request. It goes to a group of people who are praying for you, and I will continue to pray for you as well. So head over there to conciergeminister.com. I want to pray for you, and click on the website. Trust me, we're covering you in prayer.
Well, I think that, yes, I think there are people who have greater abilities in that area. I think it's something that everybody has. I remember when I was first thinking about God and whether God was love, really loved. Did God really know everything? I was grappling as a youngster with the whole concept of God and that expansive experience of God. And I thought, well, if God is love, really love, whatever that means, then salvation has to be available to everybody, wherever they are. And not just by the off chance that a missionary somewhere comes and teaches you this particular version of the message, right? It has to be somehow available to them wherever they are, under the circumstances that they find themselves in. And I still hold to that. I think that must be true. Go ahead.
So this universalist kind of view that you have is that, if I can use a very Christian, word, the idea of salvation, is that salvation comes to all people in different forms, but they still have access to that deity. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
I mean, I even moved away from the whole idea of salvation because that is not a universal understanding. And so now we're getting into deeper theological conversations. That's far away from dreams, but getting back to the idea of the wise men, and are there people like that? I think absolutely there are people like that today. I don't know, we don't have the same kind of our society isn't organized in the same way, but if you look at earlier times when people were more nomadic and you had lived in tribes and traveled around, moved around the world, finding safe places and places of abundance and plenty of food.
Mm-hmm.
Even in those tribes, you're talking indigenous people now, they had wise men and dreamers, and they were shamans and medicine men, and they could see, they had different abilities. And the interesting thing about that is that it wasn't just anybody. They revealed themselves. You could tell who was and who wasn't destined for that life. And it was largely based on a psychological crack up that happened to them. And they had to navigate that extremely disruptive psychological event. And if they went mad, then they weren't able to successfully navigate it. But if they were able to come out on the other side, they were stronger and more whole than they had been before. And they come away with gifts, which include dreams and visions.
Yeah, that's incredible. All right, so let me ask you. I'm gonna tell you a dream I had 2 nights ago. You ready?
Okay.
So and I maybe once or twice a year I may have like a nightmare or scream in my sleep, but I don't do it very often. But the other night I like screamed like screamed like crazy, and my wife had to like shake me. I was like, wake up, wake up, wake up, So I had this I had this dream. I'm in my house. We're just all hanging out, and somebody's at the door, and they keep like just knocking and bugging, like won't leave the door. And so I finally go to the door, and there's like a Christmas wreath, and there's like all this. It's kind of like foggy a little bit, but I look out, and I can kind of see 2 individuals out the door. And they keep kind of just pounding, but not rudely, but just trying to like get my attention. And I started pounding back at them and was like, get out of here, get out of here, get out of here. So this went back and forth for a while. And then I looked, and I could see that they were 2 men, but they were kangaroos standing at the door and like trying to get through. So I got mad, and I saw there was a storm door in between us. So I was like, let me open up the door, but there'll be the storm door between us where I can like yell at them, like, get out of here, right? So I opened up the storm door, and when I opened up the storm door, what I realized is that there's no glass or plexiglass in the storm door. There's just like these bars, right, that have like the storm, like the between in the door. And so one of the like kangaroo men like reached through the bars to like grab a hold of me, and that's when I started screaming, and then I woke up.
Whoa.
Tell me, what does this mean?
Well, so let me just say a few things about dreams and dream sharing and asking for feedback. One of the ways that my dream teacher taught me was that the dreamer is the owner of the dream, right? You're the arbiter of the dream, and you get the final say. Now, you may not be as proficient at dream interpretation, so you would want to stay open, but it is not for me to tell you what the dream means. I can offer, if it were my dream, I would consider these ideas or these interpretations. And I also say, from my experience working with dreams, this is what I've found that other people have noticed or found to be true. So what strikes me about your dream is that there's somebody outside trying to come in. Somebody, it can be your house, it can be your consciousness. You can think of it in several different ways. But there's something outside of you that wants entrance into your domicile, let's say, and is looking to gain entry. And they're knocking. They're insistent. It's insistent. It's not necessarily threatening, but you're a little threatened. I mean, it's dark, it's night, it's not clear who they are, what they want. So it is a little threatening. And you do feel threatened by it. And then you notice that you think it's 2 men. When you're finally you can see that it's 2 people. And then you notice that they're 2 men. And then you notice they're not even men, they're kangaroo people, which is, here's how I would look at that. What if it had been your father? That would have specific meaning to you. What if it was not your father, but an uncle? That would have somewhat different meaning. What if it was not anybody you knew, but a stranger? What if now it's not even a human, it's kind of an animal? What if it was a dog that would have a different feeling. You would be more related to a dog or a cat than you would to a tiger or a lion. A kangaroo is even further removed.
Yeah.
It's that much wilder and stranger, whatever this visitor is that wants entry into your domicile. Do you know what I'm saying?
I
so
do.
It's something that's that along the lines of, that's how strange it is to you. That's how, and it's threatening. But they weren't originally threatening.
Right.
And what I find is a lot of times with inner work, an idea will come and try to meet you. An idea or a concept or some breakthrough will try to meet you. And if we are resistant to it, and it's supposed to come be a breakthrough we're meant to have, it will have to become louder and more insistent in order to be heard. And if we continue to resist, sometimes people have dreams where they're being chased by a monster. And it may not be scary at first, but it gets scarier and scarier, and they keep running and running. If you have multiple dreams like this, and this is not always true, but sometimes you can stop in the dream and turn around and say, what do you want? And the dream, the character, whatever it is, the monster, will turn into something else that's not at all threatening. They just had to be threatening to get our attention.
Has that happened to you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And then, and it's not always the right advice to say, you know, when something threatening, sometimes the right answer is to run and get away, right? But if you keep having that dream and the thing keeps chasing you in every dream and you keep running away, then you might say, hey, maybe it's somebody trying to tell me something. Maybe they have a message for me. And if you can find it in yourself to stop and go, oh, what do you want? Then they can give you the message. And there are traditions of dreaming where they say that the demon face, when you stop and develop a relationship with, turns into an angel face. They become your strongest allies and protectors. And from then on, that what you had perceived as a becomes your ally and your angel, your guardian angel.
That's interesting. One of the things I'm kind of picking up from what you're saying is, especially the fact that it's a kangaroo. It's not even something that's even in my world here, right?
Right.
In North America. So it's so far removed. And so, you know, it's definitely something that's strange, that's unfamiliar, and that's new, right? And yet it's beckoning my attention.
Yeah. 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 So I would, if it were me, if that dream had come to me, I would pay attention to what happens over the course of the next few weeks or months. I would, if I was curious enough, I could even, as I'm falling asleep, say, that was really interesting. I'd like another dream like that, please. Or could you, or not a scary dream. So I have had this where this has happened, where the dreams are so frightening that I can't even have the wherewithal to ask about it. So I say, you know, I think you're trying to tell me something. It's too scary for me. Can you try to say it in a way that doesn't scare me? Please let me have the message in a different way. I'm paying attention now.
And then, it comes back to you?
Yeah.
Really?
Well, you know, I mean, it's all about developing a relationship with that part of you that dreams and becoming, the more of a relationship you have with that part of you, the more you can trust what happens and what comes, and you can have a dialogue with that part of you that goes back and forth. If you've neglected that part of you, you're not going to know if what comes, you know, for example, if your mom says something to you versus your wife says something to you, you know, their voices are different. You know, the way they speak is different. It's the same way with the inner world. There are different voices and different aspects of ourselves that reside there. And the more familiar we become with them by being in dialogue with them, the easier it becomes to recognize who is speaking and when, and if that voice belongs to you or does not.
I've never thought of that idea of kind of like inviting that consciousness to come back, to revisit that, to explore more. I mean, it sounds very like Matrix-ish, you know, but as you're explaining it to me, I mean, it totally makes sense. I mean, it's definitely a part of the brain and the consciousness that hasn't been used enough or been exercised enough. And so to be able to evoke it and use it and be a participant in it rather than being a voyeur, it could be really a huge step in kind of helping you with your life.
Absolutely. What you want is to partner with it, because
Mm,
it's part of our birthright as sentient beings that
mhm,
we have this helper. It's a part of the psyche, and this is why I liked Jung so much, was he recognized the psyche as an organ of consciousness in the human being, along with our other organs, our biological organs. He
mhm,
recognized that there
mhm,
are organs of the psyche that exist that are just as part of being human as having a heart and lungs and liver and all of that, the
mhm,
digestion system. And it's a huge benefit to us. So the ancient peoples understood that, and they recognized that not everybody had the same abilities. And
mhm,
so they had their wise people who inform the rest of the people. And you have people who are good at hunting and getting food. Okay,
mhm,
so you have those people do that. And then you have other people that are really good at building homes or whatever. So you have those people do that, or cooks who are great at preparing food. And
mhm,
then you have your wise people who are good at seeing into things, into the depth of things, and seeing beyond things and having dreams. And they're really good at that relationship with their psyches. So you have them informing the whole tribe. And these tribes, not just in old times, but even if you go to certain remote areas of the world now, there are there are tribes in different countries in Africa, and um, that's where I know of them the most, where they still hunt in this way, where the men go out and hunt and the women stay home and prepare things for when the men come back with the spoils of
mhm.
the hunt.
Yeah.
And they are so connected in their psyches that the women know when the men have been successful, and they start preparing the fires so that by the time the
Mm,
men get there, the fires are ready to start roasting the meat, or they
mhm,
have their instruments ready to skin and prepare the meat.
mhm, mhm,
They are connected in that deep way. That is our biological heritage that
mhm,
we've lost. That's something that was lost in the thrust towards rational thinking, which was a necessary thrust, but we can now have the rational thought and still start to explore some of these other ways that consciousness can help us that are not rational, but nevertheless real. That's what
Uh,
I think.
yeah, and I think what you're describing is so Eastern thought, and I hate to say that because it's nothing's Western or Eastern, but in our Western world, it is something that I mean, just what you said, like in societies or even in groups of people who live amongst each other, everyone has their role. Now in Western society, it's okay, now you're at an age, why don't you take a you know 200 question examination to determine what kind of career you should go to, instead of really kind of having that heartbeat to where the community is helping you discover what your role is in contribution to the community. And I think about that because I was if you remember, I was a missionary in Papua New Guinea, and I lived in the jungle, and there was I lived 6 doors down from the witch doctor, and people had dreams, people had a disease, people had marital problems, they went to the witch doctor. And I mean, the stuff I saw his ability to do, no one will ever believe me if I told you, like, the stuff, like the physical manifestation that he was able to do, because we lived in a different period, right?
Yeah.
In time. So I think what you're bringing up is something that um, we are so unaware of, just the fact that there is, if I can use Christian language, just there are seen and unseen forces amongst us that influence and shape our earthly destiny, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And, I feel it was a little bit of a disservice because the way I grew up, I was taught that anything that we couldn't explain like that
Mm,
was from the devil.
mhm,
And
mhm,
so I was terrified of things like that. I was terrified of the devil
mhm,
and being associated with the devil in any way or any kind of devilish activity or
mhm.
satanic things. And then,
Yep.
and it's not that that has gone away entirely, but I just feel that I've come to a different understanding of what the devil meant, and that, and that kind of a devil doesn't necessarily exist in all religions.
Mhm,
It's there's a different understanding of what evil is and what the devil's role is. There might be many devils, there may be devils who are associated with certain behaviors that are antithetical to life, or
mm,
you know negative in some way, but they can be ameliorated, they can be related to in a healthy way that brings about healing and wholeness. So that helped me a lot, but I it struggled with that a lot.
yeah,
So
yeah. And I think I'm kind of like maybe 30 years behind you when it comes to like deconstructing my religion. Like it's all the stuff that you just said. It's been like pushed down in me, and it's compacted, and it's been so hard to kind of break it from within, to kind of realize like, hey, that's really like an interesting idea, but maybe there's more to that. Maybe that's just a start of where I need to go. And I've been working with a friend on kind of deconstructing my faith over the last couple of years, where it's really helping me realize, especially in tune to kind of that Eastern thought and Eastern medicine. Like, just as an example, I see an acupuncturist, and before we begin, she checks my pulse, and she's not checking like the pulse that the doctor's checking. She's checking 3 different pathways, of pulse to tell me. And literally, Cynthia, every single time, she's been like, so what's going on? I'm like, I'm not telling you, you tell me. And so she'll check my pulse, and she's right on. She's like, oh, there's something going on with your gut, or you're under a lot of stress, or it's like, just nails it. And I brought it up to a cousin of mine who's a physician, and he's like, that is hogwash. It's the stupidest thing I've heard. There's no invisible pulse. But it is such a good example of how in so many ways there is an invisible part of this universe that we are so not in tune with, because of our kind of Newtonian understanding of Christianity.
yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that's the hardest to address or recognize for modern people is that, I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
Start over. I thought this had been turned off. One of the hardest things for modern people to recognize is that what you see is not everything.
Mm,
What is available to our 5 senses is not
mhm,
everything. There aren't even 5 senses. There are more senses than that.
mhm,
Our reality is too limited if those are the only tools we use to apprehend reality or to understand
mm,
it. And so when a physician says that's hogwash, well, from their perspective, I guess it is, but that is a very limited window of perception to
mm,
use, just
mhm,
the 5 senses, just what you can see and touch. What if what constitutes a human being is what you can see and touch, and also a few moments before this reality and a few moments after that reality?
right.
What if it's not just limited in time, but in space as well? What if there's now I'm blanking on the word, but there's more to us than just what you can see. There are auras, you can see auras. And now
Mhm,
I believe that they're theoretically possible, but I remember the first time I ever saw one, and it was when I was participating in a shamanic drumming ritual.
mm,
I wouldn't say ritual, it was just shamanic drumming.
mhm,
The shamanic drumming is used to, I wouldn't say it's used to, but it has the effect of putting you in an altered state, just like
mhm.
any kind of repetitive chanting puts you in a
Yeah.
more meditative state. So the drumming, and indigenous people see the drum as a vehicle, a horse that carries you somewhere. And
Mhm,
so, and I had tried to meditate, I've had limited levels of success with meditation.
Mm-hmm.
But let me tell you, when that drumming started, I didn't have to try. It was
Mm-hmm.
effortless. I was somewhere else.
Yeah.
And in that altered state of perception, the drummer, I could see his aura. It was just pouring off of him. And I kept rubbing my eyes thinking, what am I seeing?
Mm-hmm.
And it's possible to see things that are not visible to your normal profane sight.
Mm-hmm.
There are so many other things. Our human bodies are tuned to a certain level of reality,
Right.
but that's not all of reality. We know from sight that there are colors we can't see, that there's,
Yeah.
infrared and
Right.
ultraviolet that we
Mm-hmm.
can't see. Doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. We know they exist because we have instrumentation that can detect it.
Mm-hmm.
But our instrumentation isn't the be all end all either. There are
Right.
things we can't see. So to imagine that this is hogwash, there are other ways of perception that modern traditions have forgotten. And it would be great if we had access to all of these.
It'd be crazy. I mean, I know somebody who is able to see colors over human beings. So they can look at somebody and be like, oh, he's a green, he's a yellow, he's, she's a white. And there's association with each one of those colors. I mean, there's only one person I've ever met. And I don't deny that they have that ability. I mean, it's really, there's, what you're saying is, the universe is so expansive that there's possibilities for all of this. A friend of mine, that same friend of mine who talked to me about, who's working with me on deconstruction, one of the things that she said that really blew my mind this year is the idea that, that from a Christian perspective, God is amongst all of us. He's in all of us, right? So whether it's God is in all of us because we're Christians, or whether God is in all of us because we believe that we originated from a big burst, whatever it is, we all have elements of God, and we share elements of God within us. And so what that means then is that it helps me understand why I'm able to feel things for other people, even if I'm not even in the same state as they are, because that element of God is in all of us, and we share that. If I can say that energy, it's the same energy. And a good example of that, I know we're going way off of dreams, but that's fine. Listener, you listen to me, okay? A really good example of that is, I've been working with a family who husband was, given a diagnosis of cancer 6 weeks ago, and just ravaged his body a week and a half ago. I went over to the house, I prayed with them, I anointed him, I spent time with them. And in my hospice brain, because I work for hospice, I was like, oh, this guy has probably a good 2 or 3 months to live, right? Yesterday, I'm like just hit with, at 3:30, I'm hit with communicate with this family. And so I texted the daughter. I said, hey, just checking in, how's your dad? I love you. Please give me an update. What I didn't know was that around 2:20, he had passed. And then later that night at 6:00 at night, I'm standing there in the house with the body, holding his, touching his head, looking at the daughter. And I say, I don't know if I did this or not, but I think I texted you today. And she says, I think you did. And when we both looked at our phones, it was like unbelievable that I had this energy to know, like in Christianity, we would say the Holy Spirit, is speaking to me. But, and in the same way, there's this spiritual energy that we're interconnected to with each other that made me realize I must reach out to this person because there's something happening in their life.
Yeah. That's profound. It's a profound experience. And it's a realization of our interconnectedness that you can never get just from hearing it explained. you have to experience it.
Yeah. Can I tell you one last story? Because
Of course.
listen, we need to redo this episode and do a whole dream episode, okay?
That's
Because
fine.
I had lots of questions about, like, they're if you look at, kind of dream analysis, there's, standard, like what do trees mean and what being out on the water mean. Like, we need to talk about that, but
sure,
we've gotten so far off. I got to just bring you back, okay? But did you ever watch the movie Teen Wolf?
No, I did not.
Michael J. Fox? So he's like a wolf, and what he doesn't realize until like halfway through is that his dad is a wolf, but his dad has hidden his wolf tendencies and kind of has come across as a human, right? And so there's this scene where he's sitting at the table and he and his dad are kind of like, for the first time seeing each other of who they originally are and created, and that is wolves. And I tell you that because growing up, especially as a prepubescent teenager and then into my teenage years, I was able to like dream dreams and interpret dreams and have dreams come true. And I remember like sitting with my mom and I was like telling her, I was like, I know you have this gift and I know that you can tell the future, but I don't want to do that because I'm afraid I'm going to use it like for evil. Because I only had one dimension of like Jesus and Satan. I was like, I don't want to use it for Satan, take this away from me. And my mom kind of smiled and she was like, okay, but this is really like an incredible gift that you have. You should use it. But I did pray it away. And I asked God, I remember where I was, and I asked God, like, I can't have this ability. Please take this away from me. And then, 16 years old, and I never gotten it again, So I do think that there are elements of this profound kind of spirituality that we are so unaware of.
Can I make an observation that's interesting?
Yeah.
May or may not be accurate, but
Mm-hmm.
What if that's who was knocking on your door?
Dude, I'm getting chills down my body. That is so crazy. Could be.
Just a thought.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely, I think I'm in that area and place in my life where I could handle that level of responsibility, right? And where I am so in tune with wanting to help others that, it could be a benefit. So wait and see.
Well, that's interesting because I think we're trying to wrap up right here. So
yes.
I'll say this.
Sure.
In my coaching work with the corporations, I don't necessarily dream about them. But in my private practice, where I'm working with individuals who are struggling through a crisis of some kind, I very often dream about their lives.
Really?
And about their reality. And some more than others, some clients more than others. And it's been enormously helpful for me to work with my dreams about their lives. It's been a gift that I'm able to figure things out based on what comes to me. And I don't say, oh, I know all about your life. I mean, I don't.
Yeah, right.
But it gives me an idea of what to try or what approach that might help. And it's been an enormous asset. So I wholeheartedly concur that developing this ability for yourself would be beneficial to the people that you work with, especially in hospice, where I think the veils are thinner.
Yes.
Because you're working in life and death.
Yes. And in and out of consciousness, literally.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
It makes a big difference. Cynthia, I don't know if I should thank you or apologize to you, because like this is truly like such important work. And I love what we talked about today. But will you come back again? Let's talk about like straight up, like, dreams. And
I would love to. And I would love to continue this conversation with you.
Me too.
You want to.
Yeah, I would love that. It's really great. Thank you so much for joining me on this podcast. We will catch you another time. Please don't write me like stupid letters about, where I went off track today. We're all on our own journey. Okay. I'm here to help you grow as well as myself. So until another time, God bless. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Concierge Minister podcast. If you want to learn more about growing in your faith or looking for an online faith community for support while you're on your journey, please visit conciergeminister.com or send us an email at conciergeminister@gmail.com. Don't forget to click the subscribe button and give us a 5-star rating. If you find this podcast helpful, please tell your friends about us. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, go and live your best life.